Hey everybody, today is Monday, December 30th, 2024. Coming up on the show today, from Dune Prophecy, editor Anna Hauger.
We had pure CGI sequences, like all of our establishing shots, planetary establishers, the palace establishers. We had plates that were shot in Croatia. Just a huge amount of work that the VFX team was doing.
Editor Amelia Allwarden.
That was the sequence that was 4 days of filming. My initial assembly of just that sequence, which ended up at about 10 to 12 minutes, was half an hour long. But I was being very overly indulgent, okay? Let's be honest.
Editor Sarah Reeves.
And I asked the director, I said, oh my God, should I read the book now? Like, I haven't read the book. I've only seen the new movie and loved it. And she's like, don't read the book. Don't learn anything. Just go in totally blind. And I was like, okay.
And editor Mark Hartzell.
It's a challenge, but it's also so exciting to be able to focus on something different. Like, I think my job was to lean into, and now for something completely different.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, final episode of 2024. Not much time to spare. Clock is ticking, ball is dropping, all that stuff. What I'm saying is let's get this show rolling. Time is a-wasting. We have 4, yes, count them 4, guests on the show today. So lots to get to. Because today we are talking about Dune. Not Dune Part 1. We did that already with Joe Walker and Hans Zimmer. In fact, that was done as a video version of the podcast. We are also not talking about Dune Part 2. Although last week I released a timeline tour with Joe Walker, and Joe showed off how he uses sound effects and storyboards to begin building the worlds of Dune Part 2. Very cool stuff. I will put links to both those things in the show notes with the strongest of recommendations that you watch them. Have I ever let you down? Don't answer that. So, not talking about Dunes 1 or 2. Rather, we are talking about Dune Prophecy, the 6-part series that just wrapped its first season on Max. The series is a prequel to the Dune films, taking place 10,000 years prior to the Paul Atreides storyline of the movies. It focuses on the origins of the Bene Gesserit, a powerful social, religious, and political force whose members possess superhuman powers and abilities after undergoing years of intense physical and mental conditioning. I must be slipping. There's a joke in there somewhere and I can't come up with it. I suppose we're all the better for that. Anyway, with something like Dune comes a lot of expectations and a lot of work. So much story to tell, so much world building to do, and so many fans wanting you to do a great job with it all. Well, who knows more about all that than the 4 editors behind the series? That's a rhetorical question, not that I can hear you anyway. And those 4 editors would be Anna Hauger, Mark Hartzell, Sarah Reeves, and Amelia Allwarden. The first 3 editors are making their first appearance on the podcast, and the last one, Amelia, is making her third. She was on before to talk about cutting Pen 15 and Little Fires Everywhere. And now she's back. Before we reconnect with Amelia and meet Sarah, Mark, and Anna, a final shout out in 2024 to the awesome people who sponsored every episode of the podcast this year. Yes, a tip of the New Year's Eve party hat to the fine folks at Extreme Music. For over 25 years, they've given filmmakers and artists just like yourself the very best in movie music or TV music, music created by multi-award-winning musicians and composers. To get this great music, all you need to do is go to extrememusic.com. Once you're there, you just sign up for a free account and then jump headfirst into an enormous catalog of production audio that features any kind of music you need. It's really fun and really simple to do, using searchable keywords like tempo, genre, mood, lyrics, composer. Or you can skip the searching part and just upload a reference track to Extreme Music, and they'll find you ones like it. As always, you don't just get the finished track. You can get it in all kinds of flavors, right down to the stems. Their amazing stem mixer lets you dial in vocals or no vocals or keyboards or no keyboards, all that stuff. It's up to you to decide. You can even do all the licensing right there on their website. They make it that easy. So in 2025, make one of the best decisions you could ever make and partner up with Extreme Music to make your story sound its very, very best. Here's a prophecy for you. I think you're going to enjoy the interview you're about to hear. I sure enjoyed recording it. From Dune Prophecy, here are Amelia Allwarden, Mark Hartzell, Sarah Reeves, and Anna Hauger.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, you go. Oh,
there's an advantage to being on. Oh, yeah.
Is there do you have a code word if we say something that suddenly Amelia looks at me and is like, don't talk about that? Say banana or something? Is there a word for?
It's never come to that, Sarah. I think to begin our discussion about Dune Prophecy, I think we need to start off talking about a couple of other shows, mostly Westworld, but also possibly Lock and Key. Anna, you appear to be the linchpin between both of those shows, so maybe you can represent the team for this question. How is it that you got the call for Dune Prophecy, and do those two shows I mentioned factor with you, Amelia, Sarah, and Mark all being together on Dune Prophecy?
Absolutely. There is a linchpin, and I guess that is me.
That is you.
What an honor. Yeah, so Westworld I was involved in all seasons. I was an assistant on season 1 and was bumped up to editor season 2, where I met Amelia, who was assisting Andy Seckler at the time. And then season 4 of Westworld, I was an editor along with Amelia and Sarah. And so we all worked very closely with the showrunner, Alison Chapker, and executive producer, Jordan Goldberg. I guess they liked working with us because after the wrap of season 4, we all got a call from Alison asking if we would be interested in joining her for Dune. And I know I leapt at the opportunity, and I think Amelia and Sarah did as well. And then in terms of Lock and Key was my first pandemic show. I wrapped Westworld season 3 in February, went home to Colorado to see my family for hiatus, and then was stuck at home for a very long time and got the opportunity to join Lock and Key remotely in October of 2020 and worked on season 2 of that show. And then Mark, I think you came on for season 3 and we overlapped a little bit.
Yeah.
And I had an awareness of Mark and was a big fan of his work. And I think we had a few discussions about what had happened in season 2 and the process and met a few times over Zoom, but never met in person until Dune.
No.
So I don't know, Mark, how did you get involved in Dune?
God, at some point in 2021, like late 21, when they were announcing it or talking about it, I was like, God, I'd really like to try to get an interview on it. And eventually I did get an interview on it, but with another EP, not with Allison. And I had the interview. It was a good interview. Then I was told, hey, they're now looking at people who've already worked with the other EP that they brought on. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this isn't going to go my way. But then I'm assuming one of you or somebody was like, nobody wants to do a block. Nobody wants to do 2 episodes at the same time. This is too much. So if we got one more editor in to help with episode 3 or whichever episode is going to be, it would be so nobody ever got totally slammed. And then they circled back and they were like, would you like to do 1 episode? And the one and done is one of my favorite things ever. I love being asked. I've only been able to do it once or twice, but I love being asked because it's like, yeah, like coming in and helping with 1 episode is amazing because you're never going to be in dailies twice, like, while you're in producer cuts. And so, yeah, they circled back and said, would you like to do 1 episode? And I jumped at the opportunity.
So Amelia, when you are joining a show like Dune, meeting the other editors, what goes on between, and sometimes, as Anna was saying earlier, like you kind of overlap, you don't always work that closely with other editors on a series. But for Dune Prophecy, did the 4 of you have a chance to get together and talk? And if you did, what did you talk about?
Yeah, we did. Actually, the 4 of us got dinner, I don't know, probably 2.5 years ago at this point. Where we all got together and chatted. I had known Mark through the ACE internship, but we had never worked together before or really hung out very much. And Sarah and I met on Westworld season 4. And so we kind of like all knew each other from different ways. So we decided to all get together, have dinner. And from there, we were kind of always texting right off the bat, get new scripts, schedule changes, what director we're working with, all leading up to once we started the show. I think we tried to be kind of collaborating as much as possible in terms of like, how is this actor playing for you? How is the storyline shaping up? What did you guys work on with Allison and Jordan today? And, kind of as we iterate on the show, the more we were in conversation, the better off the show was because we all want to be on the same page. We're all working toward a shared vision. And it's nice to be able to work with people who you can have that open communication with, show each other editors' cut scenes, talk about things, and feel like we're on the same page and we're moving in the same direction.
I don't know if it was Amelia or who it was that started it, but originally, before Mark had been brought on, I think it was you, Amelia, who started the text chain and called it the Spice Girls, which was great for the 3 female editors, the Spice Girls going forward. And then when we added Mark, it was the Spice Den, which was the nod to Dune Prophecy's location. And I would say that what made Dune really flow well for me, and maybe for you guys too, is that Amelia and Anna and I had all come from the WESTWORLD camp, which is just very collaborative. Like, it's like a very different style of editing. You know, it's a show that they shoot a lot of stuff and it's slated for one episode, but you move it around and you really can reconfigure the storylines and play things out differently. And it's just so freeing and amazing to do it that way. And it was just brain exploding as far as like what you could do editorial. And so being able to bring all of that into Dune was pretty seamless. Like, knowing that the three of us had worked that way, Allison and Jordan had worked that way. And then having Mark come into the fold. We knew each other before because obviously, you know, all the gays in Hollywood know each other. That's just common knowledge.
The cabal, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as Anna said, everyone has an awareness of Mark.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But I've known him socially for years, but was very excited to finally get to work with him too.
Well, speaking of exploding brains, there are 23 Dune novels in total, including the original 6 books written by Frank Herbert. And then you have 17 more written by his son Brian and an author named Kevin Anderson. One of those books, Sisterhood of Dune, I believe provides the foundation for your show. But regardless, you guys have a wealth of written material to draw from, not to mention a couple of recent movies that did pretty well. So as far as educating yourself in the world of Dune goes, do you take advantage of any of that material or even find it necessary to do that to prep for this job?
I asked the director. Oh, yeah. I was supposed to do episode 2 and then I got to do episode 1. And I asked the director, I said, oh my God, should I read the book now? Like, I haven't read the book. I've only seen the new movie and loved it. And she's like, don't read the book. Don't learn anything. Just go in totally blind. And I was like, okay, then I will heed to that. And then I know Amelia and Mark are huge, huge fans of the source material. And then also our music editor, Chris Kaller, may have read all 23 books.
Yeah, I think that there are pros to having people who know a lot of the lore and having people who don't know a lot of the lore, because we can kind of combine our brains and have the perspective outside of, well, I don't understand this because I haven't read the books. And, oh, actually, we should add this thing because I know that this is in the books, right? And when you combine those two perspectives, I think it actually helps the story. I am a fan of the original Dune books, and I was really excited because I also loved the first Denis film had come out at the time. But I think when we were going into the project, it was like making the show its own thing. Like what Sarah said, it's like going based off of the scripts, and, you know, Allison's writing is very character driven. And so it's like, we're going off of actually the source material of our scripts that are based on the Sisterhood of Dune and moving forward from there and feeling within the universe, but not trying to imitate Denis' Dune, because that's its whole other amazing, incredible thing. And so I just brought my Dune fandom, but then just was like, okay, now let me take the script as it is in what Allison's intending for it to be and move forward and really honor the characters and their needs and wants for the story over anything else.
And I was raised on the original Lynch Dune, watching it way too many times on cable. And I was like, guys, you have to watch it. And I think Amelia, you definitely were like, I'll give this a try. And just so you know, it's there.
Yeah, I had never seen it. And Mark's like, I can't believe you haven't seen it.
You can't unsee it.
I watched it during editing of Dune Prophecy, and I loved it so much. I loved it so much.
It sounds like we're pretty evenly split in terms of, I know a lot about Dune, or I went into this not knowing too much about Dune. Your audience is going to be probably in a similar situation. In fact, a lot of them might not know much about Dune, or maybe nothing more than the Denis movies. So even if you didn't do a lot of research, you got to figure out how much to help the audience. I admit I don't know much about Dune other than the movies, like I said, so I did find myself looking up names and terms that were used in your show. Was that a point of discussion between you and the showrunners, the writers, about how much we really need to explain and how much we can just sort of let it just be Dune?
I think that we really relied on the showrunners' depth of knowledge of the Dune lore. I was the perfect vessel of being a non-book reader, but a fan of Denis movies and kind of knowing, I mean, I'm a savvy television viewer, or I like to think of myself as one. So I kind of felt like I was a good audience of being able to tell what needed a little bit more explanation, or what was a fine Easter egg to just kind of lay in for the fans that really didn't need any explanation. And so hopefully we came up with a good balance of that. It was something that we thought about and discussed and tried different versions of. But I think we felt pretty good about laying little Easter eggs of like Butlerian Jihad, not really explaining what that is, but you don't really need to know.
Yeah, I think that Allison always talked about wanting to make it so that anybody could watch the show. You could drop in and you could watch this show and, I think that people who want to, be a savvy television viewer, as Anna put it, will really enjoy the series. And then for people who are fans of Dune, there's an extra added layer of fun and Easter eggs. And so that was kind of our intention, was to create that balance so that we could have both groups of people watching the series.
So the show was shot in Budapest and Jordan, I think. I have my doubts, I admit, about you guys being on location for that, but maybe you were. Regardless, where were you cutting?
Unfortunately, none of us were in Budapest. That would have been fun. But we were all, I think, remote during dailies. Amelia, were you in the office at all during dailies?
No. And also, we didn't shoot in Jordan.
You didn't?
Right?
I don't think so.
Oh, want my Wikipedia donation back?
Just Budapest.
Just Budapest. But so none of us were there. We were all remote. I spent a lot of my time in Colorado, where my family lives, just taking advantage of the remoteness of it all.
That sounds pretty good.
It's pretty great.
Does that make it harder just getting a show going when you are working remote? I mean, I would think there's a certain amount of synergy that comes from all of you being close to each other as you're trying to get a new show off the ground.
I actually do think it's much harder for me. I think we all have differing opinions in terms of how we can work. And it's really great with nowadays with hybrid workflow that people can kind of mold that to what they want it to be and what's best for them. I find it to be difficult to collaborate on a show as well when I'm not in person with other people. So I tried to be in the office as much as possible or on Evercast with other people if we're working remotely. That can replicate it pretty well. I think for me, being in the same room as somebody and looking at the same screen and feeling each other's energy while we're watching a cut is the most important thing.
I like to be remote for dailies and just kind of in my own little world putting together my version of an episode. But Amelia's right. There's nothing better than watching an episode with a group of people and seeing how they react to certain things and getting their kind of instantaneous feedback. So I do like to, at certain points, go into an office and watch with people.
Okay, and so after the dailies portion of it, were you all in the same facility cutting, and could you collaborate a little more closely during that phase?
They open up an office after dailies, and people who like to work in person all the time, like Amelia, could definitely go in and be there. And for the rest of us who are Colorado-based or maybe better with ADD, less distractions, could come in as needed. But the collaborative nature of it, like also just even like on a regular show working remotely, if you don't have that rapport ahead of time, it can make it harder. But the fact that Amelia, Anna, and I had all worked together and I knew Mark socially, I feel like we were able to call each other constantly, get on the phone, talk through things, talk about dailies, talk about directing, talk about, sets. Any questions we had that open line of communication that you normally don't necessarily have if you don't know everyone ahead of time.
Mark, Sarah called this, she said, when you're working on a regular show, what is irregular about Dune?
The subject matter, the length of our first cuts was a little irregular.
Really?
Ooh.
Yeah, we had some long editor's cuts, I would say. I don't think I'm not allowed to say that. I think we can say that we started with long cuts.
Is that good for an editor, or is that more of a challenge?
It's always better to have too much than to have not enough. I have some fun stories about things I've worked on that were like, it has to be this long. And you're like, what? And you have to figure out how to pad things or...
A lot of slow-mos.
A lot of slow-mos. This is a whole side combo we could have.
There's no side convo here. Just lay it on the table, Mark.
Oh, God. Literally once I worked on a film where they were like, just take a camera and go shoot some stuff. And I was like, okay, this is a little indie film. I had to just go shoot some establishers. And then they shot a behind-the-scenes package that was immediately tied to the film for international sales so they could run that alongside the end credits, and that counted towards runtime so it could sell internationally. So
wow,
it's crap. But no, having too much is great because then you can literally edit. You can literally be like editorially from a story standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, what here is really singing, what here is really working, what is really impacting, and what do we need to hone down to sculpt the marble, to sculpt the wood into what we want it to be.
So you each had your own episode for the first 4 in the series. There's 4 of you, so that makes sense. And then for the last 2, you were all paired up to take those. Was there any logic to how the episodes were assigned to each of you?
It's a good question.
I think that we were each assigned one episode in the first 4 because we were block shooting, so it makes sense to have 2 editors, on the first block, 2 editors on the second block. And then I think we kind of came to a realization episodes 5 and 6 were such big undertakings and really important episodes. We're wrapping up a big series in 6 episodes that are action-packed. And I think it just made more sense for our schedule and for our collaboration to kind of pair up and work on the episodes together. Anna and I co-edited the finale together and talk about long editor's cuts. We had a very long editor's cut, more than feature length.
Was it more than 2? Was it
2.5?
Yeah, it was 2.5.
Yeah.
But it wasn't more than the first episode. 2 hours,
Yeah, that's right.
38
The pilot
minutes.
was.
Yeah.
Jeez.
It just made it so that we could kind of split our time a little bit better. And I think because we had so much going on in those episodes, more, I would say, story and plot wise than the first 4, that it made it so 2 minds could kind of work together and make those 2 episodes happen.
Matt, I don't know if you also noticed, I'm pretty sure all of our assistant editors got additional editing credit on every episode too, because that's the thing. When you have that much footage, you have that many scenes and you got to cut it down, it is helpful to have all hands on deck. And all of our assistant editors are amazing editors in their own right too. So getting a chance to have each one of them collaborate with us and join in was amazing. And I'm sure everybody can give their assistant a proper shout out.
I didn't catch that part. I did catch Anna getting an associate producer credit on an episode, which, time permitting, we'll get into that too. But I thought we would try and sort of run through each of these episodes just to sort of unpack all the work that you each did. So the best place to start really is episode 1, The Hidden Hand, cut by Sarah C. Reeves, ACE. Listen, I think we all need to stop and pay our respects to Sarah for taking the first episode, which in any series can be a humongous pain, but then you have Dune and its incredibly dense storylines and breadth of characters. In this case, you have several minutes of backstory to work through. You have Valya Harkonnen's voiceover describing the machine wars and how her family was shamed and made to be outcasts. And then you got to establish what the sisterhood is, what Mother Raquel's master plan was for the sisterhood to have influence over all the other world leaders. All of that before you jump ahead 30 years into what we would consider to be the present day of this series. So you have so much work to get through. Tell me about that load balancing and refining you had to do to get this series off and running.
I actually went back and looked at the script supervisor's reports because I was like, wow, why these episodes are so long, but particularly episode 1. And I noticed their notes about episodes 2 through 6 were generally setup wise around like maybe 400, 500. Maybe episode 6 had 600 setups, but episode 1 had like almost 1,200 setups. It was just like insane. But I think it's because it's world building, you're setting up all the different locations, you're setting up all the different characters. Obviously at a 2.5 plus running time, it's going to have to be condensed. And I think we tried to do that to the best of our abilities. Like probably the storyline that got cut down the most in the first episode was like the girls of the sisterhood. So you kind of see a little bit more of sketches of them. But then as the series progresses, you get to learn more about who each of those girls are. So you get a hint of it, but maybe you don't get as much knowledge as you would have had in a much longer version. And I think that it worked really well. There's no way I could have gotten through a 2-hour, 38-minute show without my assistant editor, Brian Santesteven, helping me cut that down. And he's been incredible. I've been working with him for the past 6 years and been trying to get him a different credit. But this is the first time we were able to get him additional editing on the pilot. And it was much needed, much needed.
Way to go, Brian.
But yeah, it was dense. And speaking to I had already, Amelia and Anna and I had all worked with Allison and Jordan prior on WESTWORLD. And having that experience with your showrunner ahead of time was really great. There's an open line of communication. You already know their style, their tone, their vibe. Allison and I had been thrown together in the first episode of WESTWORLD season 4, which was like a reboot. The series had skipped ahead and different characters were in different locations. And so we just piggybacked a lot. Like, hey, what if we try this? Yeah, sure, let's try that. Like it was a very good environment to just sort of like best idea wins and explore all avenues. And so having that sort of collaboration with your showrunner is a great starting point. I had never worked with Anna Forrester before, our director, who I thought was brilliant. And she directed episodes 1, 5, and 6. So all of us have had an opportunity to work with her on this series. But one thing that happened that was unique to the pilot and unique for me on a season 1 of a show is they did bring me in early to do R&D with Anna. And like they were shooting a bunch of sizzle reels of like the sets and the costumes. And she was wanting to sort of do some preliminary R&D tests on the voice as well as the vision for truth saying. So she shot a bunch of stuff with like stand-ins and just like we cut that together and added music and sound effects and got to play around with like what would the voice be like, the prototype voice. Like obviously by the time you're 10,000 years in the future in Denis films, like these women have a handle on it. But in our show, they're like very early goings, you know, it's like Valley is like one of the first times Valley is using the voice. But what was great about that is actually to build a rapport with the director ahead of time too. So then now we have an open line of communication and, you know, you just want to be able to like talk as freely and honestly as possible going forward so that you're making the best product. In light of all that, I used the litmus test of my mom who does not know anything about sci-fi, doesn't know anything about the Dune world, and like how she perceived the first episode. I was like, oh, she understands it. So like the Dune fans will hopefully really love it and enjoy like this lore that's included that they probably didn't get into in the features. And then for people like my mom who have no idea who Frank Herbert is, she also can understand it at this intellectual level. And then for me personally, one of the things I love about this show is that you just don't have big IP starring women of a certain age, like women who are in their middle ages who are getting to be like the protagonists and getting to do all this great stuff and be shades of, like you meet Valley and she slices a girl's throat and you're like, yeah, she's not going to be your regular hero. You're going to have to embrace some anti-hero stuff and just getting to see like these actresses play these parts in a big IP show is just incredible.
It's got to be really difficult at first as you're getting immersed in this world to keep track of all these characters and all these little beats. Do you each have your own methods of organization for like how you stay on top of this?
I'm sure we do. I mean, I have such specific organizations in Avid, as I'm sure all of the rest of you do. One of my biggest things is that I sub out every reset in my bins visually. I'm a really visual person and I have a visual memory. So I need to see every reset and every bin represented as a new clip landed on a frame that I can remember.
I do that on the script sync level. Like I don't put resets in my bin because I don't like a cluttered bin.
Yeah.
But in script sync, I always have the assistants kind of sub out the resets so I can see it visually there on the script.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't really edit off of script sync unless I'm doing like performance alts for the showrunner or for myself. Because I'm more visual and less like with the words, I have to do it from the clip. So it's interesting. Everybody kind of, at least with Avid, you can kind of adapt and make it very customizable and make it your own.
Amelia, you're telling me that you didn't need to use the script when you had a 4-day shoot?
Oh, yeah.
One scene, 4 days every day?
No, I didn't edit off the script for that sequence until I was changing performance for specific lines. I really have to go based off of the clip. For me, it's the way that I remember, like, based on where it is in the bin. I'm like, oh, I remember the top right take is what I like. Like, it's much more... my mind works in like a grid with spaces more than it does like linearly. If that makes sense.
There can be a progression too. I used to not use script sync. I'd be like, yeah, don't bother scripting. It's not the way I work unless it's like I'm working with a actor who's related to the director or showrunner. And then it's like, script that. We're going to have to go through it, you know, frame by frame. Or if something was so huge or so crazy or foreign language, I'd be like, yeah, just go ahead and script it.
Oh, foreign language.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't, yeah. You gotta.
But I've been on shows where then the showrunner's like, what do you mean it's not scripted? That's how I need to work. So now I have gotten more into using script sync than I did before because it's like, go ahead and script it because someone's going to ask for it, whether I want to use it or not. And now I may be becoming a slightly more dependent on it.
I don't want to say I live and die by script sync, but my goodness, when you have, 1,200 setups, it's really helpful to have it all scripted out. And also the other thing too is like we were working on this show. They block shot all 6 episodes for like 6 months. So, and then by the time I'm working on episode 1, I think before I even could get to episode 5 to work with Mark, it was like 5 months later, 4 months later. Like half the time script sync is also super helpful so that anybody can just like jump in and be like, okay, what is happening here? Like how many times did they do this line? What setups? It's just like, for me, I consider it my GPS. Like I like to watch all the dailies, but I like to have script sync with everything scripted because once I've watched it all, then I want to just cherry pick, and I have a whole method with like locators and stuff. So if I like a certain line, I'll mark a lot of locators, and then in my GPS of script sync, I can find that later on.
That's such a good way to put it. I feel like that's kind of also how I use it. Because I do have every dialogue scene is scripted. for me as well because of what you said, Mark. I want to make sure that if a director or producer's in the room with me, I can very quickly audition stuff because I don't have to use my weird brain method. So GPS is the perfect description because you can get the best of both worlds.
All right, well, we got 5 more episodes to get through. Episode 102, Two Wolves, Anna. There's a lot going on again, like, oh, these episodes, so much work. But the big scene in this episode is, to me, this is all through my perspective, the character Lila going through something the sisters call the agony. It's this dangerous kind of operation that they perform. The hope is that she can communicate with her ancestors and get some answers on how to defeat this character, this Desmond Hart fella. So to me, this is kind of the big set piece scene of this episode. It would be great to get an understanding of the challenges of putting all that together, Anna.
Yeah, my perspective matches your perspective. That was definitely the most challenging scene in the episode. And I loved it because of that. It was an enormous creative challenge, and it was kind of a playground of the imagination. The way that it was shot, it wasn't even blue screen. It was our main character, Lila, in this just dark space. There was nothing there. So the light was just on Lila, and we had to use our imagination to figure out what was going on around her and tell that story of her ancestors coming to life in her brain and the chaos that ensues in her pursuit of this knowledge from Raquella. And just on all levels, it was so much fun. It was very difficult, but also just creatively inspiring to be able to kind of decide, when are we in the lab with Lila and Tula and the acolytes, and when are we in the mind space, and deciding that we needed to be in this kind of surrealist mind space until she meets Raquella, and just staying with Lila in the agony in this cavern. We had many iterations of it because there were so many ways you could go. At one point, I just kind of had to sit down and figure out what the story of the agony was in my mind and kind of communicate that with our brilliant visual effects team, spearheaded by VFX supervisor Mike Enriquez and our VFX producer Taryn Pratt, and just being in communication about, this is an idea I have. Is this realistic? And getting their blessing, and then not showing because we didn't have previs for it, but kind of explaining to Allison and Jordan what I was thinking, and then they would say, that sounds great, but what about this? And then, so we kind of take it into another direction, and through that collaboration with VFX, with the showrunners, myself, we really were able to bring this really cool space to life. And then having our sound team put the sound design on top of that was just like the icing on the cake, and really came together in an amazing way.
Yeah, that's something you mentioned, the mind space part of it and not having previs. I think that's something you all had to deal with, in that, for example, that scene features these crazy visuals that are when someone is having a vision of some kind. Is it a discovery process for each of you? Is it something you have to get together and decide, well, when somebody's having a vision, it's the eye, then it's this, then it's that, or there's a certain design element to how we put these together? How do those work? How do you all come together and figure out what those kind of unscripted visuals are going to be?
I feel like it's just experimenting with the footage we have. I think as editors, we all get inspired to play around with different quick cuts, different visuals, and kind of, I know Sarah had, a whole kind of vision sequence, cautious nightmare, I should say, that starts off that visual language and has so many different interesting elements that you could freeze on and get, a lot of information from each thing. So I think it was really just editorial experimentation.
Yeah, and it was constantly evolving as well through discussions with the showrunners and visual effects. And when we would get some post-viz back, the ideas would change, the cuts would change, the pacing would change. So it was just a back and forth constantly.
Luckily for episode 1, I did have previs for Kasha's Nightmare and Raquella's Vision. But even if you have a previs, they still can shoot things very differently. Although for Raquella's Vision, they never actually shot anything. That all had to be created. But for Kasha's Nightmare, they did shoot a lot of practical stuff. But even then, my director was like, let's get radical with it. I'm sorry, I can't do her really stellar German accent. But she just wanted to try a bunch of different stuff, including my favorite thing, which was like the two actors, Kasha on the bottom and Inez on the top, and had that like, they split screen and it like gets like the room grows. That was all just like something Anna had pitched. And I was like, that's amazing.
And piggybacking off that incredible shot in episode 1, and Inez is pointing her finger at Kasha and saying, you did this. In episode 6, in the mind killer scene, Amelia and I had this realization that one of the characters, Griffin, says the exact same thing to Valia. Like, you did this. And so I pitched an idea that was really bizarre of creating something that had not been intended and not been shot, of mimicking and mirroring this wonderful shot that Anna Forster had initially pitched, of having these two characters separate in the same way they do in episode 1, just to kind of mirror those dream sequences. And when I first pitched it to visual effects and to Allison and Jordan, they were like, well, this could work. So we had it in the episode for a long time, knowing that it might not be in the episode in the end because it might just look too weird. But fortunately, the mind killer scene, like Kasha's Nightmare, is completely surrealistic. And so you can take these liberties that maybe traditionally you wouldn't be able to. And it ended up being a really cool shot, I think. I don't know if anybody will realize that that's what's going on.
No, I had not watched episode 6. And when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, what a great callback. This is amazing. So thanks, Anna.
What I was going to say earlier is being in later episodes, you have the advantage of being able to go to people who've done the R&D earlier. For me, there's sort of a mini agony in episode 3. And I remember being like, what's going on over at episode 2 with the agony? Being like, oh, that's a lot. That was not, I think, the original intention of our little baby agony, but I think some of that's going to spill in. So that's an advantage to being down the road and being able to look backwards and be like, what's coming down the track?
All right, Mark. Well, episode 3, Sisterhood Above All. You called it a one and done earlier. Mm-hmm. You have a somewhat unique experience on this series doing that one and done show. It functions as kind of a break in the series and goes even further than that 10 minutes Sarah had in that first episode to explore the backstory of young Valia and Tula and what drives them to be the way they are. How is doing that kind of episode, a one and done or a bottle, any different than doing an episode that is part of the main narrative?
It's actually sort of a big treat. It's a challenge, but it's also so exciting to be able to focus on something different. Like, I think my job was to lean into, and now for something completely different. And now all of a sudden there's young Tula on a horse and you're in a different environment. And my job was to explore those performances and sell the audience on being like, hold on, I know you were expecting, a sandworm and a sword fight, but how do you feel about a interesting romance? How do you feel about getting out in nature and watching some people in love go through some interesting experiences together? And the mean way of putting it be make you believe that these people are in love, but they actually are very much in love, and watching somebody who is wanting and realizing that they have a path before them that could have been really good and really warm, but watch them give in to their darker impulses, natures, or pressures is sort of that's like, woo, I want to cut that. So that's what I got to cut.
Sisterhood above all, Mark.
Yeah, there you go. And Tula's a trooper.
Tula's a trooper. Well, you are too, Mark.
Thank you.
In this episode, we learn the origin of the voice. Not to mix sci-fi metaphors, but it's for people that are not familiar with Dune, it's kind of like a Jedi mind trick that Valia and eventually all the Sisterhood and Bene Gesserit will come to use. And that kind of brings us around to sound design. So whether it's how you do the voice or the little whispering voices that characters hear in their heads, or even like the buzzing sound of the body shields, are all of those things developed independently in the series? Or are there any sound design elements or tricks, I guess, that are borrowed from the Denis films for continuity?
Well, we are 10,000 years prior to the events of the Denis film. So I think what was really important about finding the sound of the voice, for example, like Sarah and Mark have both said, this is the first time the voice is being used, or close to the first time the voice is being used. And it will change over time. And so we kind of had to come up with our own origin of what that would sound like at this time. And I guess draw inspiration from the Denis films in that, you can hear many voices of the four mothers throughout the voices in the brilliant sound design in the Denis films, but making sure we have our own spin on it. For example, like the thumpers, right? The thumper design, this is visual effects, but is different than the thumper design in the Denis films because you would assume technology would have evolved 10,000 years later. So the thumpers in our show are more like waist height for an average man size. And so, the thumpers in the film are much smaller, and things like that changed. And obviously, because machine technology is banned in our current universe, technology can't advance so much. So instead, humans advance. That's why we have mentats, and the voice is an example of that evolution. And so I think we just wanted to make sure that we were kind of drawing inspiration in a way of keeping in the same universe, but we're setting our own prequel backstory.
It's a fine line. It's an interesting line to walk.
Yeah.
Also, there was a lot of text messages from Amelia and Anna, or anyone who had an episode that had heavy whispers, being like, hey, can you guys record these lines? Hey, can you record these lines?
Oh, yeah. We had constant group chats of us whispering.
The ancestor voices.
Yeah.
But we also had our sound designer involved pretty early on, giving us ideas for specific sound effects, like the ships and the Boltzmann shields and the voice.
Shout out Aunt Shabelli, right? Aunt Shabelli?
Yeah, Anne Shabelli. She's incredible. But at a certain point, when we were just trying to do our temp sound design for the voice, I know for my episode 2, I had my assistant editor, Adam Neely, kind of sound design that. And what he brought back to me was actually amazing. He had used his own voice, modulated it with some kind of processing to be the background voice to Valia's voice. So I can't even imitate it, but he said it was like this E.T. voice he did as a kid of him being like, take out your sword. Hold it to your throat.
I think you did that pretty well, Anna.
Thank you. I think it was a great kind of template and a powerful way to kind of give us a starting point and showing that to Anne Schiavelli and her putting her spin on it.
Episode 4, Twice Born, says here Amelia Allwarden. You have a few fun scenes we could talk about. You have the montage where the sisterhood leaks information about Pruitt's death. That seems a little complicated. You have the art class from hell. But I thought we would talk about the High Council meeting in the Emperor's Hall where Desmond Hart fries the rebels. That's a big scene. Lots of characters, setups, inserts, effects of characters getting charbroiled. Mm-hmm. That seems like it could be the hardest one to work on for this episode. Let us hear about how you approached that one.
I love that sequence. Well, that was the sequence that Sarah was referencing earlier that was a 4 days of filming. My initial assembly of just that sequence, which ended up at about 10 to 12 minutes, was half an hour long. But I was being very overly indulgent, okay? Let's be honest. I was frying a lot more and we didn't need it all. I mean, that's kind of the climax of the episode in a way. And a lot of what we're leading up to in the whole episode is everybody's plans kind of coming toward the Landsrad. Now, one of the problems that we encountered, or I guess not necessarily a problem, but something we identified when we were watching episode 4 was the fact that we've never seen the Landsrad before. When we hear the word Landsrad, if you are into the Dune universe, you know exactly what it is. But if you're not, you don't. And so one of the things that we did editorially, which was really fun, it was a collaboration between Jordan and I, was basically the sequence that introduces the Landsrad toward the beginning of the episode was created editorially from pieces of the climax of the episode. Originally, the episode, everybody's talking about their plans. Valia's, thinking about her plan, and Kieran and the rebels are talking about their plan, and Carino's talking about his plan. Desmond's talking about his plan. It's all at the Landsrad. But we don't know what the Landsrad is. So we realized we never saw it until we entered the throne room when Harrow Harkonnen walks in for the first time with Valia, and she's his truthsayer. So to make that more impactful, I editorially created an introduction to the Landsrad where I added CG shots of ships coming down to Seleucus Secundus. People are coming from all over, and the roll call is being held. And the Speaker of the Hall is explaining the Landsrad and calling the week-long session to order. And we see everybody in the room and we see everybody in the space. Again, those were all stolen pieces from the later sequence to visually show us what the Landsrad is at the beginning of the episode, so that when we do come to it finally toward the last third, we're like, oh, I know where we are. We're at the Landsrad. So that was really fun. The sequence itself coming together was really cool because it's every character kind of coming together at once. And I love getting indulgent with something really intense, like burning someone alive from the inside. So that was really fun, all while intercutting this whole episode with what's going on at the Sisterhood. And you mentioned the art class from hell, which I love, the drawing scene. This had to be placed at the right timing in the episode to escalate the intensity on both planets simultaneously and find out information in kind of the right order so that we could unravel the story in the most intense way possible. And so I loved editing that drawing scene where the girls have taken spice and they're kind of going deeper and deeper into their nightmare, and they're drawing together and they come into like this synced, all of their nightmares merge. As I edited through that sequence, I, cut faster and faster, and Richard Lewis, the director of the episode, he and I collaborated really heavily on some inserts. I cut the scene with the main photography, and then we kind of identified places where we could do really intense macros where it would just be charcoal really up close. And I would cut to those faster and faster and closer as we got through the sequence, and then ramp up the sound design. My assistant editor was McKenna Cook, but at the time of this episode, Michael Scotty was helping me sound design this sequence for the initial pass. And I remember that I said, I feel like it can be very musical, the way the breathing is, the way the drawing sounds are, and it can ramp up like orchestral strings. And his response to me was, consider it my ninth symphony. He really went hard on that sequence. And then when I was working on the sequence with McKenna, she just kept amping it up with her own breathing. And every time I would change the sequence, like we had to readapt all of the breathing and the drawing sounds and kind of make that charcoal really intense, make every page rip really intense. I really love how it turned out because there were a ton of pieces. That was actually one of the first scenes I cut for the show. And I got all the dailies for it. And it was almost like a full day of filming that scene. And I remember getting all of it and being like, oh my gosh, this is a lot to work with. But it was really an abundance of riches because everything's great in that scene. I love that one.
Ninth Symphony. Somebody knows how to move up in the world. While we're talking about symphonies, for the score, for the temp process, do you use Hans Zimmer's stuff or do you stay away from that? Or is there any guiding principle to things you might temp with?
We temped, I think, with Dune's score for a while, and then at some point the suggestion was to stop doing that, to change the temp so it was non-Dune score. For one of the more interesting parts of episode 3 that in the temp is very similar in the final, our composer, Volker Bertelmann, had done sort of the temp outside Atreides bard music, people playing some sort of unusual future instrument. And we cut in and out of a love scene along with this sort of, ritual hunting party. My assistant, Timothy Cooper with a K, did a really good job from the get-go of being like, now we're in this emotional bubble with these two characters who are engaged and are going to really lean into each other in a romantic way. And outside is this sort of half pagan festival happening and how those two are going to build together. And then there's going to be this big reveal at the end of it that, oh my God, those are Atreides. And he just got engaged to a Harkonnen and clearly doesn't know it. And this is all going to blow up. So the temp work he did there was really extraordinary and is very similar to what you see in the final product as you transition between the two moments.
We also have a fantastic resource in Chris Kaler, who's our music editor. He was a music editor on WESTWORLD as well. And he was really able to kind of dig deep in his library and his knowledge of music to help us bring these scenes to life.
Yeah.
Not just even his library. We wanted to have some drums in like the opening sequence that was kind of like the pre-cap or whatever I call it, like you meet young Valia and like what she wants. And he like went and like drummed beats.
Yeah. He does that all the time. He takes little pieces from different scores and puts them together and brings out his like synthesizer, his drum kit. It's amazing to be able to work with him and to have that resource.
Chris is amazing. One fun fact about him is that he knows how to use Avid as a music editor, which I think is pretty rare. And he worked in editorial with us, which was amazing. He could look at our cuts real time in his own Avid, and he could sync his Avid with Pro Tools and work really seamlessly. And it made everything so fast, so efficient, and so that he could really, really help us out every day.
He was in office too.
Yeah.
He's a full-time music editor for us, which is so rare and makes our lives so much easier.
There should be a music editor on the team of every show, especially when you have like this amount of music. I once asked him to like give me the stems because I was like, I want to have all the stems so I could see what you use. And it was like 18 tracks. I was like, okay, no, just give me the wave. I'm fine with that. But also he has a kid named Cadence, which I think is the coolest name ever if you're a music editor. Also, he is like the biggest Dune fan. Like, I don't think I knew exactly what Desmond was. I still don't even know if I know exactly what Desmond is, but he would constantly be texting me as he was reading the scripts, like what he thought Desmond was. And he'd be saying all these words that I was like, Chris, are you speaking English? I don't understand like what you're texting me right now. Like Tuluxian, all these things. I was like, I don't know what's happening.
We've talked about music. We've talked about sound design. We've certainly talked about story because there's so much to talk about there. We haven't really talked too much about the visual effects aspect of it and probably should because it's prevalent throughout.
It's a big part of the show.
Well, okay, so being a big part of the show, how does that VFX pipeline have an impact on how you prioritize your work on an episode, or does it?
It does to a great extent, because if there are sequences that require a lot of visual effects, the sooner that we can get through those and to get a lock on those sequences, the better, because visual effects will have more time to do what they need to do. So we try our hardest to honor that and kind of have just constant communication with the visual effects team and get their input from early stages.
Yeah, there's big scenes that are going to be heavy visual effects. And then there's all sort of surprises where you're like, God, I wish I had a shot that did this and could help me get these two characters here. So I never worked with Mike Enriquez before. It was great. But I did work with Taryn Pratt for all 3 seasons of Lost in Space. So I know at the end of a sequence, I was like, I think Allison was like, God, I wish there was like a button on this scene. And I was like, give me a sec. And I took a freeze frame and took 2 freeze frame characters and just animated them walking into a building. And I'm like, they can probably digidouble this, but then went down the hall because I was in office then and tried to find Taryn and be like, hey, heads up. I think I just put a shot in. I need 2 digidoubles, but I think you have them. They're in sisterhood garb. I know you're going to have them. I'm sorry about this. Let me know if it's, too much of a problem. But you have that flexibility sometimes to help enhance story with something that may not be readily known as a visual effect. That's totally a visual effect.
And we had pure CGI sequences, like all of our establishing shots, planetary establishers, the palace establishers. We had plates that were shot in Croatia. Just a huge amount of work that the VFX team was doing. And we would all, at some point, walk down the hallway and be like, Mike, Taryn, we have an idea. Most of the time, they were happy to accommodate us. But I think there were probably a few times where they were like, oh, again? Another shot?
What's that old adage, right? In set, they're always like, fix it in post. And then we're definitely like, can we fix it in VFX? Can VFX fix it, please?
We have a problem. Visual effects, please help us.
As a viewer of your show, it appeared to me like you guys had a lot of work to do. And now having talked to you, you definitely had a lot of work to do. The good news is here we are at the end of the year. You can kind of hopefully get a little downtime. We are heading into a new year. I thought I would really bug the hell out of you and ask you for your New Year's resolutions. Editorial related, or if you have some personal things you need to work on, that's fine too. Nobody's going to want to go first, but somebody has to. Resolution for 2025.
I think that one thing I always do editorially is if I have a problem that I can't work around, I just kind of live with it for a while. And my amazing assistant editor, McKenna Cook, laughs at me sometimes where she's like, I had a solution for that. If you just told me you were having this issue, I could have solved it in 2 minutes. And my resolution, I think, is going to be to bring up little inconveniences that I have and try and solve them quickly instead of keeping them to myself and just being like, it's okay. I'm not going to bother them with anybody.
We're in the same, I literally was like, I've been losing sleep a couple weeks ago over something where I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to? And the answer, I was talking to the other editors and they were like, really? Are you losing sleep? And I'm like, what, you don't? And then once I talked to Tim Cooper about it and I was like, here's something to respond to. And he was like, well, what if you did this? I'm like, oh yeah, that'd be, just because you have to have something to respond to and then you can move forward from there. But no, my resolution is to be like, don't let this keep you up at night. Just, walk away and let it marinate. Plus a lot of the good answers always come at 4 a.m. You wake up and you're like, I know what to do.
Yeah, mine is a little different. I have been cutting on 2018 Avid for a very long time and have not had to go to the new ones. But now I'm working on a new show with Mark and I've been forced into 2024. And so I guess my New Year's resolution is to make peace with 2024 and try to figure out how to make it exactly like 2018 as much as possible because I love Avid 2018. I love it, love it, love it.
My current show is 2023 and it took a couple hours to get used to it, but I actually really love it. I'm so happy with the features.
Me too. I prefer it now.
We're going to need to revive some of our Spice Den chain of me pulling out my hair and asking questions to you guys.
I've got some tips and tricks, and it makes me very happy to share my nerdy Avid knowledge.
I see an Anna video coming.
Oh, absolutely. Like and subscribe below. Okay, my New Year's editorial resolution is not going to be as good as everybody else's, but I'm going to try to utilize my standing desk a little bit more. I find myself sitting way too much.
I love that.
I do too. Yeah.
We should all stand right now.
We should all stand.
I'm in my closet. I can't.
Well, those are all really good. I don't have one myself.
Come on. No, you got to give us something.
Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't fair. I do have a resolution, and that's to keep the podcast going for 2025 and to look for ways that it can be even better, besides getting another host. A big thanks and a happy new year to Mark, Amelia, Anna, and Sarah for talking with us today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed a lot of things on our exploration of the editorial arts throughout 2024. It's been quite a year. What will next year hold? I don't know. But I hope we can continue this journey together. I'll be here, I think. For now, you have a fun and safe New Year's Eve, and we'll meet again soon for the next episode. Not sure when that'll be. I might have a little bit of a New Year's Eve hangover. But we'll get back together. Until then, this is Mad Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.